Hi, I'm Dave Robison, one of the hosts of the Roundtable podcast, and you are in for a treat. Recently, Dan Absalonson came on our show and workshopped one of his story ideas with me, my co-host Brian Humphrey, and our guest host for that episode, author Dan Wells. Well, since then, Dan's been working feverishly on this masterpiece and has gotten it to the point where he's ready to share a bit of it with you. And here it is, never before presented in any format or venue, the worldwide premiere of the first section of Dan's work in progress. I don't know about you, but I'm going to enjoy this.
The Truth About Zombies. Working title. A novel by Dan Absalonson. Chapter 1. As an old man in a tattered medical gown shambled barefoot across the pitted and stained parking lot of Green Star Gas and Mart, Ron Stamps loafed around inside, getting the store ready to open and daydreaming about his favorite customer, Valerie. She, with her breathtaking smile, had not come in the day before. The best part of his day, the only good part, when she bought a bran muffin and a coffee, did not happen. So his day had been all bad. One rude customer after another, a cold meal alone at home, and an afternoon of sleeping through the sunlit day, just to wake up in darkness at dawn and do it all again. Ron looked at the clock. It was 4:55 a.m. In 5 minutes, he planned to open the door and stand behind the cash register, smelling the first pot of coffee drip as he waited for the morning rush to come through, and for her. He did not end up opening the door that morning. He was starting to think that dropping out of high school for this job had been a bad idea. At 19, he was a year behind in school and had aged out of the foster care system. A real job, which afforded him his own place, sounded way better than being a super senior and living at a shelter. His thoughts drifted back to Valerie. He hoped everything was okay with her. He knew he was nothing more to her than the gas station guy, but she made his day with her smile. It was one of those smiles that spread warmth and kindness to everyone around her, making her hazel eyes light up and seem that much brighter under her glowing auburn hair. As he put out the platter of donuts and set the hot dog machine to heat and rotate, he saw a figure approach the door. This wasn't unusual. Sometimes a customer was in a hurry to get on the road early and wanted something quick before they set out. "Store opens in 5, Ron yelled without looking up. The man started banging on the glass. Ron jumped and swung his gaze over to the door. A man stood there, staring at Ron like he wanted to walk past the donuts and have him for breakfast. While his face was wrapped in an expression of rage, his eyes seemed vacant and dead, like there was nothing inside. It was unnatural, and it scared Ron more than the fact that he was banging on the glass door. "I said we open in 5 minutes. Please stop hitting the door. I don't want to have to call the cops." Ron could take rude people and working a thankless job, but he hated confrontation. He was more of a peacemaker than a fighter. He noticed the man's bare legs were scraped and scratched with spots of dried blood and dirt caked on them. It looks like he's walked through some brush or tall weeds, but there's nothing like that around here. Where did this guy come from? Ron thought. Ron was also surprised that the man wore only a gown, like someone waiting for a surgery. He saw a lot of crazy things working in the city, but nothing like this. The gown had tears all over it, like the man had walked right through tree branches. Ron wondered if it was a patient who had escaped from a mental institution. He was reaching for the phone to call the police when the man's hands broke through the glass door. Ron grabbed the shotgun under the counter instead and wondered if the man had thrown something to smash through the glass door, because his bare hands should not have been able to break through them. Ron saw as the man walked in over the shattered pane, however, that nothing was in his outstretched hands or on the floor in front of him. Below his left eye, a piece of glass had cut him, and a streak of blood began sliding down his face. Ron gripped the shotgun tighter as he heard glass shards cut into the man's feet. The muted, crunching sound made Ron sick to his stomach. The shotgun felt greasy in his hands from a sudden outpour of sweat. As with the cut on his face, the man didn't seem to notice pain and just kept walking towards the counter like a creature out of a horror flick. Ron raised the gun at the man and found his voice again. "You're in a lot of trouble now, sir. Just stop right there and let me call the cops before this gets worse. It looks like you need some help." It was as though he was talking to the wall of refrigerated beer and energy drinks. The man just kept coming. When he walked into the counter and started turning to come around to Ron's side, the gun went off. Ron didn't remember pulling the trigger, just the feeling of absolute terror as this non-responsive madman kept creeping towards him with a look of death on his bleeding face. The man fell back, smashing into a rack of snacks, knocking them onto his injured stomach. A yellow bag of pork rinds fell into the hole in his gut, then bounced out, sliding to the floor with a stain like it had been smeared with ketchup. While the man was down, Ron sprinted past him, over the glass-strewn floor and out into the parking lot, reaching for his phone. He stopped, dialed 911, and lifted it to his ear as he turned to see if the man had somehow started to follow him out. Just as the operator answered the call, Ron felt his phone being pulled out of his hand from behind. He turned to see a 7-foot gleaming robot with the letters NS stamped in yellow across its chest, crushing his cell phone into tiny bits.
"That will not be necessary,"
it said in a droning voice that sounded like a larger, more powerful version of the coffee maker inside. "Hey, that was my phone."
"Did a man bite you?"
"Bite me? No, he tried to come at me, but I shot him before he could—"
"That is good. You may not be implanted."
"Implanted?"
"You must come with me."
"I'm not leaving. My boss will fire me if I'm not here to open the store. Let me at least go inside and call him." The robot's arm transformed into a small seat, and he pushed it forwards towards Ron.
"Please have a seat. I will escort you to the Nanotech Solutions facility, where you will be treated for your safety."
"I can't go with you. I will lose my job. And I need to see Valerie. Reassure her that this is still a safe place to buy breakfast," Ron thought. "At least let me call my boss first and explain the situation."
"We do not have time for that."
In a quick, fluid motion, the robot reached out his other arm, spun Ron around, and scooped him up into the newly formed seat. "Hey!" A latch whipped across Ron's waist before he could jump down. The robot then flew into the store, hovering over the broken glass. He stopped above the man, with the hole in his stomach, which Ron noticed had shrunk to half its original size. "What is going on here?" Ron thought. The robot's other arm formed into a chair and scooped up the man whom Ron was certain should be a corpse. As they lifted away from the gas station, Ron noticed the man was still breathing. He wasn't sure how that was possible. The wind was brisk in Ron's face as city streets below looked like toy race car tracks whooshing by. Soon, a forest came into view, and the smell of the air went from stale to fresh as they sailed over dark green pine trees. Ron looked back at the man in the other armchair and saw that he was wide awake. His stomach was no longer bleeding. He twisted his head and saw Ron, then began thrashing and clawing in his seat, trying to reach him. It was the only time Ron felt glad he was sitting in the arm of a giant robot. They flew for a while until the city was long gone from view. Ron didn't take his eyes off of the other man until he felt the robot slow down. Ron looked down and saw only trees. They were going to land in the dense forest. He had expected a big gray building, but there was nothing. Then he realized it must be an underground facility. The small confidence he had in nanotech solutions, keeping his best interests in mind, slipped away from him, along with his chance to see Valerie. Ron's dark bangs danced towards the sky as they began descending towards the swaying trees. As they landed on the forest floor with a clang, small birds scattered into the sky in a flourish of flapping wings. Ron's nerves were already stretched thin, and the sound of the fleeing flock startled him. The robot walked forward 3 steps and then stopped. Ron waited for something to happen. Nothing. His butt was getting sore, and he wanted to be free of his big metal captor, but he couldn't see a way out. Then the mossy forest bed started rising up, and Ron saw they were on some kind of lowering platform. Any hope he had of a search party finding him here disappeared with him into the dirt. The lift stopped at what must have been 50 feet below, and the robot stepped off. Then it rose up, sealing the room in total darkness. The robot waited again. Ron couldn't see his hands in front of his face or hear anything but his own measured breaths and the thrashing and incoherent screams of the man in the robot's other arm. He wanted to be anywhere else. A few seconds later, a door in front of them slid open to the side, revealing a bright white corridor. The light was blinding to Ron, but he placed his hands in front of his eyes and squinted, trying to see what he was being led into. All he could see was white. The robot strode in on his huge legs at a pace of an Olympic sprinter. Soon Ron could see a floor below him, blank white walls, and a matching ceiling above. A minute or so later, the walls were broken up with broad windows, and Ron could see huge rooms full of people working. Not one of them looked up from their work to notice the giant robot carrying Ron and the screaming man down the hall. They wore lab coats and were scurrying between desks, robotic assistants, and massive machines of some kind. Some were looking into telescopes, and others at displays on large screens. Then they came to the end of the hall. The robot stopped and waited again. The man screamed and thrashed. Ron sat, not making a sound, trying not to pee himself. The door opened, and the robot walked in. Along the walls were 3 rooms wrapped in bars on the left and the right. Jail cells. I'm in trouble, Ron thought. He wanted to ask the robot why he was brought here when he was told he needed to be rid of contaminants, but he was too scared to speak. To his right stood 3 empty cells, but to his left, the first one held a gruff-looking old man in a gray jumpsuit. The middle cell was empty, and the far cell had a girl inside. The robot opened the middle cell on the left and pushed his arm into it, releasing the belt strap and Ron. Ron slid off to a stand and heard the cell door close behind him. With everything inside him, he wanted to turn around and scream at the robot to ask him what was going on, but it was already taking everything he had not to cry. I can't cry with a girl in the next cell, he thought. So he just stood there as the robot took the demented man with him back out of the room into the hallway. The door shut with a thud, that made Ron flinch. The girl in the next cell got up and walked over to the bars separating their cells. "Don't I know you from somewhere? Her voice sounds so familiar," he thought. Ron forced his frightened face to relax, and he looked over. It was Valerie Kite. Thank you guys so much for listening. This is Dan, the author of this first chapter, which is all I've written of this zombie book, but I'm pretty confident that it's going to be my best book yet, and I believe I owe that all to having it workshopped. Not only was it really fun, being a huge fan of the podcast, both Dave and Brian and Dan Wells, it was just an honor to be on there. But beyond that, it was very valuable to me. I had a story idea with some flaws, some awesomeness, all mixed up together. I needed some help creating literary gold. Those guys helped me do that. Now the rest is up to me, so I'm going to get back to writing. Thank you so much for listening. You might have noticed the audio quality was a bit subpar. I just moved, just got a brand new laptop, still kind of getting it all dialed in, but you can check out my stuff at dandantheartman.com. I'm on Twitter and Facebook as Dan the Artman. So, hope you found what you're looking for, as Dave likes to say. Thanks again for listening and have a great day.
Music used by Kevin MacLeod over at Incompetech.com. Sound effects used are from freesound.org. This podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivative Works 3.0 International License.
Any writer will tell you that a good workshop can make the difference between a good story and a great one. Wouldn't it be great if you could workshop your story with some of the rock stars of new media? I mean, people like Nathan Lowell and J. Daniel Sawyer and Chuck Wendig. That would be amazing. You know, that would make an outstanding podcast. Oh, wait. It already is. Introducing the Round Table Podcast, a weekly podcast where writers discuss their story ideas with some truly remarkable people. Weekly episodes start on Tuesday, March 6th, and will be available on iTunes and on the Roundtable Podcast website. Visit www.roundtablepodcast.com for more information. The Roundtable Podcast, Literary Alchemy, one podcast at a time.